When we think about the history of America, we often learn about the grand ideals of freedom and opportunity. We learn about presidents, wars, and inventions. But there is another story. A story that is often left in the shadows. This is the story of how the American economy was built. It is a story deeply connected to the institution of slavery. Many of the companies we know today, the very foundations of our modern world, have roots that dig deep into this painful past. They did not just exist alongside slavery, they actively profited from it. This history is not just about the South. It is an American story, woven into the fabric of our nation's commerce from New York to New Orleans. Understanding this history is not about placing blame on people today. It is about seeking the truth. The truth is that the wealth of this nation did not appear out of thin air. It was created in large part by the forced, unpaid labor of millions of enslaved African people. Private companies, from the smallest shops to the largest financial institutions, developed systems to turn human beings into profit. They created financial products, transportation networks, and consumer goods that all depended on the brutal reality of slavery. This economic engine powered the country's growth for centuries, and its effects are still with us. We must look at this hidden ledger to understand the real price of American prosperity. It is easy to think of slavery as a system of individual plantation owners, but it was much bigger than that. It was a sophisticated corporate enterprise. Banks, insurance companies, shipping lines, and factories all played a crucial role. They were the gears in a machine designed to extract maximum value from human bondage. Enslaved people were not just laborers, they were assets on a balance sheet. They were used as collateral for loans, insured like cargo, and clothed in rough garments made specifically for them. Every step of this process created a stream of revenue for businesses that, in some cases, still operate today, under familiar names. Lifting the veil on this history is essential work. For a long time these stories were buried, the documents hidden away in corporate archives. But now, thanks to the hard work of historians and researchers, the facts are coming to light. It is our responsibility to listen and to learn. We need to understand how the profits from slavery built fortunes, funded universities, and laid the groundwork for entire industries. This is not just a history lesson, it is a conversation about who we are as a nation and what we owe to the past, as we try to build a more equitable future for everyone. The banking industry was a powerful engine in the economy of slavery. It provided the financial fuel that kept the system running. Plantation owners often needed large amounts of money to buy land, equipment, and more enslaved people. Banks were there to provide the loans. But to secure these massive loans, the banks needed collateral. They needed something valuable that they could take if the borrower could not pay back the debt. In the American South, the most valuable asset a person could own was another person. So, banks began accepting enslaved men, women, and children as collateral. This practice was not a secret, it was a standard part of doing business. Imagine walking into a bank today and offering a human being to secure a loan. It is unthinkable. Yet for generations this was how wealth was built. Major banks, some of which have evolved into the institutions we know today like JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, had predecessor banks that participated directly in this system. For example, Citizens Bank and Canal Bank of Louisiana, both now part of JP Morgan Chase, accepted thousands of enslaved people as collateral. If a plantation owner defaulted, the bank would seize their property, which meant they would take ownership of enslaved people and could sell them to recover their money. This turned banks into active participants in the slave trade. Wall Street itself, the heart of American finance, has deep connections to this history. The city of New York was a major hub for the cotton trade, and its economy thrived on the labor of enslaved people in the South. A prominent slave market once operated just a short walk from where the New York Stock Exchange now stands. The profits from cotton, sugar, and tobacco, all produced by enslaved labor, flowed north and filled the vaults of New York banks. This wealth helped finance the Industrial Revolution in the North, building factories and railroads. The system created a cycle where the exploitation of people in one part of the country generated immense fortunes in another. In recent years, some of these financial giants have had to confront their past. In 2005, JP Morgan Chase issued a formal apology after uncovering records of its predecessor bank's involvement in slavery. As a gesture, the company established a $5 million scholarship fund for African American students. Similarly, banks like Wells Fargo and Wachovia have also acknowledged their historical ties. These apologies are an important first step, but they also highlight a difficult truth. The financial advantages these institutions gained from slavery helped them grow into the powerful corporations they are today, a legacy that cannot be erased by a single apology or program. Just as banks found a way to profit from slavery, so did the insurance industry. The business of insurance is to manage risk. For slave owners, one of the biggest risks was losing their investment in enslaved people. An enslaved person could die from disease, an accident during dangerous labor, or during the perilous journey of the domestic slave trade. To protect themselves from this financial loss, slave owners could purchase insurance policies on the lives of the people they enslaved. This treated human beings exactly like property, no different than insuring a house against fire or a ship against sinking. It was a cold, calculated business decision. Companies that are still household names today were involved in this practice. New York Life, Aetna, and US Life are among the insurers that sold these policies. An owner could pay a premium, and if the enslaved person died, the company would pay out a claim. These policies made the brutal business of slavery seem more secure and financially sound. For example, if a slave owner was transporting a group of enslaved people from Virginia to a cotton plantation in Mississippi, they could insure them for the journey. This reduced the owner's financial risk and encouraged the expansion of the slave trade. The insurance companies, in turn, collected premiums and profited from this trade in human lives. The details of these policies are chilling. They reveal the deep dehumanization at the core of the system. The policies would often specify the name, age, and value of the enslaved person being insured. They were business documents, treating people as items on an inventory list. Aetna, one of the oldest insurance companies in the country, has publicly acknowledged its role in this history. In 2000, the company issued an apology for selling policies that insured the lives of enslaved people. Lloyd's of London, a major player in the global insurance market, also apologized in 2020 for its role in the transatlantic slave trade, and pledged to fund charities benefiting Black and minority ethnic groups. This history shows how deeply slavery was embedded in the American economic system. It was not just a fringe activity, it was supported and enabled by the most respectable financial institutions. The profits from these insurance policies helped these companies grow and accumulate vast wealth. This wealth did not disappear, it was reinvested, helping these companies become the corporate giants they are today. Acknowledging this past is a necessary step in understanding the long-term economic consequences of slavery and how its legacy continues to shape our society and our economy. The textile industry was one of the first great industries of the modern world, and it was powered by cotton. In America, that cotton was planted, tended, and picked by millions of enslaved people. The connection between the cotton fields of the South and the textile mills of the North and England created a powerful economic engine. Even after states like New York abolished slavery within their own borders, their economies remained deeply dependent on it. New York City became the financial center of the Cotton Kingdom, with its merchants and bankers financing the trade and its factories turning slave-picked cotton into cloth. This connection created a demand not just for raw cotton, but also for clothing. Some apparel companies found a direct market in slavery itself. Brooks Brothers, a brand now known for its high-end suits, was founded in 1818. In its early years, the company manufactured and sold rough, cheap clothing specifically designed for enslaved people on southern plantations. This type of clothing was known as slave cloth. It was durable and inexpensive, meant to clothe a workforce without spending much money. Slave traders also sometimes bought this clothing to make the people they were selling look more presentable at auction, hoping to get a higher price. The story of Brooks Brothers shows how ordinary consumer goods could be directly tied to the institution of slavery. The company was not just using a raw material produced by enslaved labor, it was creating a product for the explicit purpose of outfitting an enslaved population. This history has not always been front and center in the company's branding. While other companies have issued apologies for their historical connections to slavery, Brooks Brothers has been quieter about this part of its past. It serves as a reminder that many businesses have chapters in their history that they would prefer to keep hidden from public view. The vast profits from cotton created fortunes that are still felt today. The demand for cotton was so high that it fueled the westward expansion of slavery into new territories like Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas. It was a cycle of exploitation. The more cotton the mills demanded, the more land was cleared for plantations, and the more enslaved people were forced into brutal labor to meet that demand. The simple fabric of a cotton shirt had a hidden history of human suffering and corporate profit, linking the fields of the South to the factories and storefronts of the North. The growth of slavery in America required a vast and efficient transportation network. Enslaved people had to be moved from the older slave states of the East Coast to the new cotton and sugar plantations in the Deep South. The goods they produced, bales of cotton, barrels of sugar, and crates of tobacco, had to be shipped to markets in the North and in Europe. Railroads and shipping companies became essential partners in the slave economy, and they made enormous profits from their services. These companies were not passive observers, they were active participants, building the infrastructure that made the expansion of slavery possible. Railroad companies were some of the biggest businesses of the 19th century. They received huge grants of land and government support to lay tracks across the country. In the South, many of these railroads were built using the forced labor of enslaved people. Plantation owners would rent out the people they enslaved to the railroad companies, who subjected them to grueling and dangerous work, clearing land and laying track. The railroads then profited again by transporting enslaved people in freight cars to be sold at distant markets. They also charged fees to transport the products of slave labor, connecting the plantations to the global economy. Similarly, shipping lines played a critical role. While the international slave trade was officially banned in 1808, the domestic slave trade within the United States flourished. Ships regularly transported thousands of enslaved people from ports like Alexandria, Virginia, to hubs like New Orleans, Louisiana. These journeys were horrific, with people packed into crowded and unsanitary holds. The shipping companies that owned these vessels profited from every person they transported. They also carried the cotton and sugar that was the lifeblood of the Southern economy, making fortunes for shipbuilders, owners, and merchants in port cities like New York, Boston, and Baltimore. The legacy of these transportation networks is complex. The railroads and shipping lanes helped build the modern American economy, connecting different regions and enabling commerce. However, we cannot separate that growth from the fact that they were also instruments of oppression. They were the arteries through which the lifeblood of the slave economy flowed. The wealth they generated helped build cities and create fortunes, but it was wealth built on a foundation of human trafficking and exploitation. Understanding this history helps us see how deeply slavery was integrated into the very infrastructure of the nation. Beyond the big banks and railroads, many other businesses profited from slavery through agriculture and the sale of everyday goods. The entire agricultural economy of the South was built on the foundation of unpaid labor. The immense profitability of crops like cotton, sugar, tobacco, and rice was only possible because the workforce was enslaved. This created a system where plantation owners accumulated vast wealth, which they then spent on goods and services, further fueling the economy. But even companies that sold simple consumer products could have direct ties to this system of exploitation. A powerful example of this comes from the whiskey industry. The story of Jack Daniel's, one of the most famous American brands, actually has a hidden history. For many years, the official story was that a young Jack Daniel learned the art of distilling from a white preacher named Dan Call. However, in 2016, the company officially acknowledged the truth. The man who actually taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey was an enslaved man named Nathan Nearest Green. He was a master distiller, and his skills were the true origin of the famous Tennessee whiskey. Enslaved people were central to the Southern distilling industry, but their contributions were erased from history for over a century. This story is important because it shows how the skills, knowledge, and labor of enslaved people created immense value for brands that became American icons. Nearest Green was not just a laborer, he was an expert with a valuable craft. His legacy was nearly lost, but its recovery shines a light on the countless other contributions made by enslaved people that have gone unacknowledged. The profits from the whiskey he helped create flowed to the company's owners, while he and his family remained enslaved. It is a stark reminder that the products we see on store shelves can have deep and painful histories. The story of King Cotton is the most famous example, but the principle applies to many other goods. The sugar that sweetened tea in homes across America and Europe came from Louisiana plantations where enslaved people worked in some of the most brutal conditions imaginable. The tobacco industry, centered in Virginia and North Carolina, was also entirely dependent on enslaved labor. Companies that processed, packaged, and sold these goods were all part of a long supply chain that began with an act of violence and exploitation. The profits were shared among many, but the pain was borne by one group of people. It may be surprising to learn that some of America's most prestigious universities have deep historical ties to slavery. These institutions, now seen as centers of enlightenment and progress, were often funded by profits from the slave trade or built using the labor of enslaved people. Their early leaders, donors, and even faculty members were often slave owners themselves. This history challenges the image of these universities as places that have always stood apart from the darker chapters of American history. Instead, they were deeply embedded in the economic and social structures of their time. Yale University provides a clear and well-documented example. The university is named after Elihu Yale, a Welsh merchant who served as a governor for the East India Company. He made his fortune through the company's operations, which included participating in the slave trade. For centuries, this connection was not widely discussed. However, in recent years, the university launched the Yale and Slavery Research Project to investigate its own history. In 2024, after years of research, the project published its findings, and the university issued a formal apology for its historical role in and connections to slavery. This marked a significant moment of reckoning for a major American institution. Yale is not alone. Many other elite universities, including Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, and Georgetown, have also begun to research and acknowledge their own ties to slavery. Some universities owned enslaved people directly, using them as servants and laborers on campus. Others were funded by donations from wealthy merchants and plantation owners whose fortunes were made from the slave trade. The very buildings where students attend classes today may have been constructed by enslaved workers. This history is written into the physical and financial foundations of American higher education. Acknowledging this past raises difficult questions about what should be done today. How can these wealthy institutions which benefited from slavery begin to repair that harm? Some have started to fund scholarships, create monuments, or invest in educational programs. Georgetown University, for instance, has offered preferential admission status to the descendants of the 272 enslaved people it sold in 1838 to save the university from financial ruin. These actions are part of a larger, ongoing conversation about what true institutional accountability looks like and how we can ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. The end of the Civil War, and the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, were supposed to end slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States. However, the amendment included a critical exception, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. This loophole allowed for a new form of forced labor to emerge in the years after the Civil War. Southern states quickly passed laws known as Black Codes, which criminalized minor offenses and led to the mass arrest of newly freed African Americans. They were then leased out to work on plantations, in mines, and on railroads in a system called convict leasing, which was in many ways slavery by another name. Today, that loophole in the 13th Amendment continues to allow for a system of forced labor within American prisons. This system, often referred to as modern-day slavery, disproportionately affects people of color, who are incarcerated at much higher rates than white people. Inmates in state and federal prisons are often required to work for little to no pay, performing jobs that benefit both the state and private corporations. They produce goods ranging from office furniture and military supplies to food products. This cheap labor allows private companies that partner with prisons to reduce their operational costs and increase their profits. This practice has created a multi-billion-dollar industry. Thousands of companies across the country have benefited from prison labor, either directly by using inmates in their production lines, or indirectly by using suppliers who do. This creates an economic incentive to maintain high rates of incarceration. The work is often difficult, and the working conditions can be poor, yet the laborers have no right to unionize or demand better wages. This exploitation echoes the past by creating a system where a vulnerable population is forced to work for the financial benefit of powerful corporate and state interests. In response to a growing awareness of these issues, there is a movement to change the law and hold companies accountable. Activists are pushing for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would close the 13th Amendment's loophole entirely. At the state level, new laws are being proposed to address corporate complicity in both historical slavery and modern prison labor. For example, A bill introduced in Illinois in 2025 would require companies seeking state contracts to disclose any historical ties to slavery and contribute to a redress fund. These efforts show a growing recognition that the economic exploitation of the past has not fully disappeared, it has simply changed its form. The story of how American companies profited from slavery is not a comfortable one, but it is a necessary one. It forces us to look beyond the simple narrative of a few bad actors and see slavery for what it was, a massive economic system that was fully integrated into the fabric of the nation. Banks, insurance companies, railroads, universities, and manufacturers all found ways to make money from the brutal exploitation of human beings. The wealth they created did not vanish when slavery ended. It was passed down through generations and reinvested, helping to build the corporate and institutional giants that dominate our world today. Remembering this history is crucial because its legacy is still with us. The economic gap between black and white Americans, which persists to this day, has its roots in a system that systematically stole wealth from one group to enrich another. When we understand that some of our oldest and most respected institutions built their foundations on this stolen wealth, we can begin to understand the depth of the inequality that remains. This is not about assigning guilt to individuals today. It is about taking an honest look at our collective history and acknowledging the truth of how we got here. The recent apologies and reparations efforts from companies and universities are a start, but they are only the beginning of a much longer journey. True reconciliation requires more than just words. It requires meaningful action to repair the harm that was done. This includes everything from investing in communities that have been historically disadvantaged to changing modern practices like prison labor that continue to echo the exploitation of the past. It requires us to ask tough questions of the companies we support and the institutions we admire. Ultimately, facing this history is an act of strength, not weakness. It allows us to build a future on a foundation of truth rather than on a foundation of silence. By understanding the deep financial connections between slavery and American capitalism, we can better understand the world we live in now. It gives us the context we need to fight for a more just and equitable society, one where prosperity is not built on the suffering of others. This is the work we must all do to learn, to remember, and to commit ourselves to building a better future.